The scripture lesson this morning is taken from St. Mark chapter 9. I'll be reading it from the Eugene Peterson paraphrase, The Message. So you're welcome to follow it in the Pew Bible, but the words will vary somewhat from what you have in front of you. This passage takes place as Jesus has just cast a demon out of a man from whom the demon had created some kind of seizure disorder. It was a healing that the disciples had attempted but hadn't been able to accomplish. And so after this healing, Jesus and the disciples moved on from the crowd, and this picks it up as they are making their way through Galilee. Leaving there, they went through Galilee. He didn't want anyone to know their whereabouts, for he wanted to teach his disciples. He told them, "The Son of Man is about to be betrayed to some people who want nothing to do with God. They will murder him. 3 days after his murder, he will rise alive." They didn't know what he was talking about, but were afraid to ask him about it. They came to Capernaum. When he was safe at home, he asked them, "What were you discussing on the road?" The silence was deafening. They had been arguing with one another over who among them was the greatest. He sat down and summoned the 12. "So you want first place? Then take last place. Be the servant of all." He put a child in the middle of the room, and then cradling the little one in his arms, he said, "Whoever embraces one of these children as I do, embraces me, and far more than me, God who sent me." Holy wisdom, holy words. Thanks be to God. The sermon this morning has to begin with a personal story. That's always a questionable thing for a preacher to do. And even worse, the personal story has to begin with a confession. That's probably a worse thing for a preacher to do. But don't be alarmed. The confession isn't anything juicy, such as you might read in the National Enquirer or anything like that. The confession is, I am not a football fan. I don't really care anything about football. Now, I realize that's a dangerous confession to make in the metro area, which is the home to the Kansas City Chiefs, and Sally is nodding her head because she's a longtime Chiefs fan. And believe me, this was an even greater dangerous confession to make the 16 years Joy and I lived in Nebraska. Worse yet, I'm making this confession on a day of a Chiefs game. But I will get done in time for you to get there, have no fear. Because I certainly have nothing against people who love football, or I have nothing against those who love to play it. But I only make that confession so you'll understand the story that follows, which had to do with my good friend and church member at the time, Craig Williams. Craig had retired from his 30-year career with the Power Company, and being still pretty young and a lot of energy, he decided he needed a retirement career. So he bought a t-shirt shop and invested a lot of money in equipment that would embroider logos and words on t-shirts and jackets, usually of a sports genre. And Craig was so happy about this new business venture, I just can't get over how he was so thrilled. This was like a brand new life for him. And so one day I was congratulating him, and by the way, I need to add that my hobby at the time happened to be that I owned an antique Packard automobile. Now, I'm well aware that many of you in this congregation are too young to have ever heard of a Packard automobile. If you know the name Packard at all, you probably see it hyphenated with Hewlett, and you don't see it on the front of a car. Anyway, there was such a thing as a Packard automobile, and I owned one. So I said to Craig, "I'm so happy about your new business venture, I'm going to come down and talk to you someday about making me a Packard shirt." "Sure, come on down." However, before I could get down and talk with him, maybe a week later, Craig came by and he had a brown paper bag and a big